Hey fam, welcome. Happy Wednesday to all of you. We are jumping into Mark chapter 2. We're going to end chapter 2 and we're going to be looking at verse 23 through 28. And I want to start off with the question. And the question that I have for you today is, do you observe Sabbath? Do you observe Sabbath? And if you do, I just want you to reflect, or maybe you can even write on the comments, what does observing Sabbath to you look like? What is Sabbath and how does that look for you? And we're going to jump into the text because Jesus does say something interesting. He says to some religious people who are upset with Jesus for breaking Sabbath, he says that Sabbath was made for humankind. Humankind wasn't made for Sabbath, right? So he's like, listen, they're going to get into like kind of a dialogue, a little argument. It's like Jesus says, listen, Sabbath was made for humankind, not the other way around. And I want you to think of it like if you think about boundaries, right? You and I have boundaries in life, right? But boundaries were made for humans. Humans weren't made for boundaries. Or think about church. You go to church, like church was made for humans, for you and I, but we weren't made for church. Like we're not made for that purpose. The reason why Sabbath even comes into existence is because of humankind. God rests on the Sabbath, and then he invites Adam and Eve. Their first day of existence is into they experience rest, right? God's like, listen, everything's already made. Everything's already taken care of. That's called grace, right? Your first day of existence, God says, is to encounter relationship and rest. I want you to rest in me because you're going to encounter me on the Sabbath and you're going to encounter each other on the Sabbath. Humankind encounters each other and they experience all of creation. God created it all. So the reason why Sabbath even comes into existence is so that you and I can experience and encounter the rest and the provision of our God. In other words, Josh, you're not God. No matter how much you work, no matter how much, like if you stop, the world is it's gonna be maintained by the grace and the wisdom and the power and the goodness of God. And I know you and I live in a culture where it's all about work harder, keep on grinding, keep on working. And the culture sometimes has been applauded for people who work a lot, right? People who grind, people who keep on going. And of course, we do have to work hard, no doubt. But yet Jesus is stepping into this. And so unlike back then, the religious people, the Jews, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, the different communities within Judaism, they did keep Sabbath. They observed Sabbath. But the way that they observed it, or the way they thought it was supposed to have been kept, often clashed with what Jesus actually lived from the day to day, right? What he did on Sabbath. And so I want you to think about that for yourself as number one, do you Sabbath? Uh, and if you do, what does that look like? And if you don't, why don't you Sabbath, right? Why don't we Sabbath? And search the scriptures for yourself. Read, look it up. Look at how many times Sabbath is put, throughout scriptures. It happens, on the very beginning of time, right? God creates Sabbath for humanity. So let's jump into Mark chapter 2, beginning at verse, like I said, 23. It says this: one Sabbath, he was going through the grain fields, that is Jesus. And as they made their way, right? So they make their way through the grain fields, Jesus's disciples began to pluck heads of grain. The Pharisee said to him, look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? And he said to them, that is Jesus, he said, have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need of food? How he entered the house of God when Abiathar was high priest and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for anybody to do but the priests. And he gave them some to his, and David gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for humankind, and not humankind for the Sabbath. For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. That's a big statement that Jesus is making. And he's trying to say, listen, by the way, I'm letting you know who I am. I'm the one who created the Sabbath, and I'm letting you know I'm not the one breaking it right now. Ooh, that's so good. Jesus is Yahweh incarnate, right? Jesus is God become flesh. John would say, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word dwelt among us and became flesh, right? So here Jesus is speaking directly to the religious leaders who assume that they know the law. They assume that they know the Sabbath and that their interpretation of how to keep Sabbath is the correct one. And yet the very one who's standing in front of them, they don't recognize him to be Yahweh incarnate, right? And good reasons. I'm sure if you and I were living in the first century, we maybe would think the same thing. We wouldn't be like, wait, you're God, you're Yahweh, you're the I am, you're the one speaking in Genesis. Like maybe we would struggle with that too, right? I know the religious Pharisees get a bad reputation sometimes, but they were doing the best. They were trying to study law. They were trying to, understand the Torah. They're trying to keep the commandments of God. But the way that they have interpreted isn't necessarily correct or healthy. And Jesus comes and says, listen, you're mad at my disciples for they got grain, right? And they're for the Pharisees, that was considered doing work. So for those of us who keep Sabbath or don't, maybe you don't know what is part of Sabbath is, you don't work on the Sabbath, right? 6 days you labor and do all of your work, but the seventh, right, is the day of rest to the Lord your God. Part of the commandments, it says, in it you will do no work, you nor your servants. Of course, we don't have servants like back in Moses' day, right? You basically, the whole idea is nobody in your family, not even your animals, nothing, everything ceases. Everybody stops working because this is a day of complete equality. We are all equal before the presence of God. And this day, this Sabbath, is really supposed to be how we live our lives. It's pointing us to the future. Sabbath is not just pointing us back to creation, it is also pointing us forward to new creation, to which God will make a new heavens and a new earth where there will be no more separation from God, where there will be no more violence and exploitation of the land and harming one another as humanity in the name of capitalism or getting rich and all these things, right? And so, but the point being is, if you were in Jesus's day, I want you to think about this for yourself as an exercise. Do you think that you'd be arguing with Jesus? Would you and Jesus maybe see things differently? And if so, let's just fast forward to today. Where in your life today do you need to unlearn some things that you've been taught? Maybe the way your family brought you up, maybe what you learned in church, maybe how you interpret scripture, how you read a certain story. And where do we need to unlearn so that we can learn the way of Jesus, to learn the way of God? And Jesus's answer to the Pharisees that day is, hey, listen, Sabbath was made for humankind. Humankind was not made for Sabbath. You are making Sabbath a burden, and it was never supposed to be a burden. It was supposed to be a day of liberation, a day of presence, a day of connection within myself, connection with God, connection with creation, connection with other people. But you all, right, the way the Jews were observing Sabbath, they made it actually a heavy burden. And Jesus, like I said, is saying in the same way, where in our lives have we kind of just put things or work or businesses or whatever we're doing, where we put things above people, right? I think there's a quote that says the most important things in life aren't things, they're people. The most important things in life aren't our ideologies, our interpretations, our idea of holiness, because that was the whole thing. They believed, hey, your disciples are working because they're getting the grain from the field. They're not supposed to work. That makes you unholy. And Jesus is like, boys, you guys are getting it wrong. You've missed the whole point. So that's all I got for you today. I encourage you to go into scripture, dig for yourself. If you have any questions, please write in the comments some questions that you might have or some opinions that you might have so we can be in dialogue, in conversation. But just dwell upon that, right? Where in my life, Jesus, show me, what do I need to unlearn? And what are you inviting me into so that I don't make things more important than people? But I see that, hey, God, the most important law is the law of love, right? And Sabbath is part of your law. And so if on Sabbath it's not inviting me into a deeper presence of love, into a deeper presence of communion with you and with creation and with other people, then maybe the way that I'm celebrating Sabbath isn't as good as I thought it was. All right. I will see you Friday. God bless you. Feel free to share this with somebody if they need to hear this. Follow us on Instagram at theway.sd, or you can go to our website, thewaysd.com. God bless, and I'll see you soon.